Silence is a heavy armor. For 20 years, Rowena Stirling wore hers to survive a court that fed on whispers and weakness. They called her the broken mute of Ironwood. They didn't know her silence wasn't a flaw. It was a cage holding back a power meant for a king. In the brutal, stone-walled keep of the Ironwood pack, weakness was not just a sin. It was a death sentence. To be a werewolf in the year of our Lord 1482 meant living by the absolute, unforgiving laws of blood and hierarchy. And in this vicious ecosystem, Rowena Stirling was at the very bottom of the food chain. Rowena had not spoken a single word since the winter of her 6th year. That was the year a pack of feral rogues had breached the southern borders of the Cornwall province. She had hidden beneath the floorboards of their ancestral estate while the monsters tore her mother, Amelia Stirling, apart. The trauma had physically severed her connection to her voice. The pack healers had poked, prodded, and burned herbs, but her vocal cords remained locked in a perpetual state of terror. Without a voice, without the ability to bare her teeth and snarl her dominance, Rowena was demoted from a high-born daughter of the Stirling bloodline to a glorified scullery maid within the household of her uncle, Lord Harrison. Lord Harrison was a cruel, opportunistic man. He had eagerly absorbed the vast Stirling estates into his own upon her parents' demise, keeping Rowena around merely as a prop to prove his benevolence. In reality, her life was a sequence of cold stone floors, lye-burned hands, and the constant, suffocating scent of disdain from her peers. "Move, half-breed," a sharp voice snapped, followed by a heavy velvet slipper kicking Rowena's bucket of dirty water. Rowena didn't flinch. She simply grabbed the wooden handle and shifted her weight, keeping her eyes glued to the muddy boots of her cousin, Beatrice. Beatrice was the golden child of Ironwood, tall, fiercely aggressive, and possessing a coat of pure auburn when shifted. She was exactly what pack society demanded of a high-ranking female. Today, the keep was in a state of chaotic frenzy, and Beatrice's anxiety was bleeding into the air, smelling sharply of sour citrus and ozone. King Alistair Blackwood was coming. Alistair was not just an alpha. He was the sovereign of the Northern Territories. His reputation was carved in ice and soaked in blood. At 32, he had fought his way to the throne through a violent rebellion, executing his corrupt predecessors and uniting 3 warring provinces under his iron fist. It was whispered in the sculleries that his wolf was monstrous, a beast of pure shadow that defied the natural laws of their kind. More importantly to Lord Harrison, King Alistair was unwed. He had come to Ironwood under the guise of an annual treaty inspection, but every noble family knew the truth. The king was searching for a queen. "If you ruin my dress with your filthy water, mute, I will have the guards flay your back," Beatrice hissed, leaning down so her hot breath hit Rowena's ear. "The king arrives by sunset. Lord Harrison wants you kept in the cellars. If Alistair sees a broken, defective runt like you sullying our halls, he'll think our bloodline is tainted." Rowena offered no reaction. She nodded once, her face a mask of placid obedience. Inside, however, her wolf, a creature that had never fully formed, suppressed by her trauma, stirred with a strange, frantic energy. For 3 days, Rowena had been experiencing phantom pains, a bizarre pulling sensation in her chest, like a silver thread being drawn tight across hundreds of miles. By the time the war horns blew from the western watchtowers, signaling the king's arrival, Rowena had retreated to the shadows of the high balcony overlooking the grand courtyard. She wasn't supposed to be there, but a morbid curiosity had taken hold of her. She needed to see the monster everyone feared. The great iron gates groaned open. A procession of 50 heavily armored riders rode into the courtyard. The sheer pressure of their combined alpha auras hit the courtyard like a physical shockwave. Some of the weaker servants instantly dropped to their knees, clutching their throats as their lungs struggled against the dominant pheromones filling the air. At the centre of the vanguard rode King Alistair. He was a mountain of a man, clad in black iron plates and a heavy wolf-pelt cloak that draped over the back of his massive war-horse. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked as though it had been carved from granite, marred only by a jagged pale scar that slashed from his left temple down to his jawline. Lord Harrison, flanked by Beatrice in her finest crimson silks, hurried down the steps to grovel. "My king!" Harrison boomed, dropping to one knee. "Ironwood welcomes you. Our hearth is yours. Our blood is yours." Alistair did not immediately respond. He swung down from his horse with a terrifying grace. As his boots hit the cobblestones, he froze. Rowena, hidden behind a stone gargoyle 2 stories up, felt her heart slam against her ribs. The silver thread in her chest pulled so violently she gasped, a silent intake of air. Down below, King Alistair's head snapped up. His eyes, a piercing, unnatural shade of amber, scanned the courtyard, slicing through the grovelling nobles, ignoring Beatrice completely. His nostrils flared. He was scenting the air, his jaw clenching so tight the scar on his cheek stretched white. "My king?" Lord Harrison asked nervously, rising halfway. Alistair's gaze dragged upward, locking directly onto the shadowed balcony. For a fraction of a second, across the distance, his amber eyes met Rowena's wide, terrified gaze. The air around the king seemed to crackle. A deep, chest-rattling growl began to vibrate from the sovereign's throat, a sound so primal it made Lord Harrison stumble backward in fear. Rowena scrambled backward, pressing her hands over her mouth, her pulse roaring in her ears. "No," her mind screamed, "it's impossible, it can't be." She fled down the servant stairs, retreating to the darkest corner of the cellars, desperately trying to scrub the scent of her own panicked sweat from her skin. But the damage was done. The Alpha King had caught her scent, and the ancient magic of the mate bond had struck the iron walls of Ethelgard. The Grand Hall of Ironwood was a masterpiece of medieval excess. Tapestries depicting great lupine hunts hung between blazing hearths that roasted entire stags. The tables groaned under the weight of silver platters, spiced wines, and heavy breads. Yet, despite the warmth of the fires, the atmosphere at the high table was freezing. King Alistair sat beside Lord Harrison, looking akin to a caged predator. Throughout the evening, he had barely touched his food, nor had he offered more than monosyllabic grunts to the desperate conversational overtures of the nobles. Beatrice, seated directly across from him, had leaned so far forward her corset threatened to snap, her scent deliberately spiked with the sweet, heavy musk of an eager female. "Your Majesty," Beatrice purred, tracing the rim of her goblet. "The northern winters must be terribly lonely. A strong king requires a strong pack, and perhaps a companion who understands the burdens of ruling." Alistair finally turned his amber eyes toward her. There was no warmth in them, only the chilling calculation of a seasoned killer. "A strong king," Alistair rumbled, his voice like grinding stones, "requires loyalty, not empty flattery from a pup wearing her father's ambition as perfume." Beatrice flushed a violently humiliated shade of red, shrinking back into her chair. A suffocating silence fell over the immediate area, Lord Harrison swallowing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. In the periphery of this disaster, Rowena was working. Despite Harrison's strict orders to remain hidden, the kitchen master had run out of serving girls. Driven by the chaos of a royal banquet, a massive tray of heavy iron flagons had been shoved into Rowena's scarred hands, and she was pushed into the hall to refill the lower tables. She kept her head down, her coarse woolen dress a stark contrast to the shimmering silks of the guests. She moved like a ghost, pouring wine, wiping spills, stepping silently out of the way of drunken lords. She kept as far from the high table as possible, praying to the moon goddess that the king had forgotten whatever scent he caught in the courtyard. But the mate bond is not a fragile thing. It is a biological imperative, a soul-deep gravity that cannot be denied. As Rowena moved toward the center aisle to return to the kitchens, a drunken knight from the Ironwood Guard thrust his chair back abruptly. It caught Rowena directly in the hip. She stumbled, the heavy tray slipping from her grasp. Crash. The deafening sound of iron hitting flagstone echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Red wine splashed across the floor like blood, staining the hem of a nearby noblewoman's dress. "You stupid, clumsy mute!" the knight roared, embarrassed by his own clumsiness, shifting the blame instantly. He raised the back of his hand and struck Rowena hard across the cheek. The force of the blow sent her crashing to the floor, her cheekbone scraping against the sharp edge of a fallen flagon. Pain exploded in her face, and a warm trickle of blood slid down her chin. The hall fell dead silent. Everyone watched, waiting for Lord Harrison to punish the defective servant for ruining the king's feast. Lord Harrison stood up, his face purple with rage. "Guards, drag this useless wretch to the courtyard. 50 lashes for insulting our guests." Rowena pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, her head ringing. She didn't cry out. She couldn't. She just braced herself for the rough hands of the guards. But the hands never came. Instead, a sound ripped through the hall that froze the blood of every werewolf present. It wasn't a growl, it was a roar. The raw, unadulterated, earth-shaking roar of an alpha's beast, completely taking over its human host. The heavy oak table at the front of the room splintered in half as King Alistair stood up. His aura, previously suppressed, detonated outward. Several lower-ranking wolves in the hall collapsed, vomiting from the sheer, crushing pressure of his dominance. The candles in the chandeliers flickered and dimmed. Alistair vaulted over the shattered table, landing in the center aisle with the heavy thud of a predator. His eyes were no longer amber. They were glowing, molten gold. "Who?" Alistair snarled, the word echoing like a thunderclap. "Drew her blood?" The drunken knight who had struck her took one look at the sovereign and fell to his knees, openly weeping in terror. My king, she is but a mute servant. A broken thing." Alistair didn't walk. He blurred. In a fraction of a second, the king had crossed 20 feet, grabbing the knight by the throat and lifting him entirely off the ground with one hand. The sounds of the knight choking and kicking filled the terrifying silence of the hall. Lord Harrison rushed forward, panicked. "Your Majesty, stop! She is my ward, Rowena Stirling. She is defective, completely mute. She cannot even speak her own name. Please do not soil your hands." Alistair threw the knight against a stone pillar with bone-crushing force. He turned slowly toward Harrison. "If you speak her name with that filthy mouth again," Alistair promised in a dangerously quiet voice, "I will rip your tongue from your skull and feed it to my hounds." The king turned away from the trembling lord and slowly approached the spot where Rowena was still kneeling on the wine-soaked stones. The terrifying, monstrous aura that had just suffocated the room instantly vanished, replaced by a warm, sheltering blanket of pine, campfire, and deep, protective earth. Rowena trembled, looking up through the veil of her messy hair. The king of the Northern Territories, the most feared man on the continent, dropped heavily to his knees right into the puddle of spilled wine, heedless of his royal garments. He reached out a large, heavily scarred hand. His fingers were shaking. Gently, as if she were made of spun glass, he cupped her face, his thumb lightly brushing the drop of blood from her bruised cheek. "Mine," Alistair breathed, the word a desperate, ragged prayer. Behind them, Beatrice scoffed, unable to contain her jealous disbelief. "Her! A mate! She can't even speak to you! She's broken!" Rowena closed her eyes, a tear finally escaping, the shame burning hot in her chest. Beatrice was right. What good was a queen who had no voice, who could not sing the pack songs or command the armies? But Alistair's hand tightened slightly on her jaw, forcing her to open her eyes and look at him. The ferocity in his golden gaze was entirely focused on her, blocking out the rest of the world. He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers, his breath warm against her lips. "She can't speak." Beatrice's voice pierced the heavy silence again, a shrill, desperate sound of a woman watching her crown slip away. "Do you not hear me, Your Grace? She is a broken mute, a defective creature who brings nothing but shame to the Stirling name." Alistair didn't turn. He didn't blink. He kept his glowing golden eyes locked entirely onto Rowena's tear-filled gaze, ignoring the murmurs of the stunned court. His massive hand gently stroked her hair, smoothing the tangled, coarse locks as if they were spun silk. The Alpha King lowered his head, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his voice a deep, resonant vibration that sent a jolt of pure electricity down her spine. "You were always meant to call me, little wolf. I have just been waiting for the right time to hear you." The departure from Ironwood was swift and brutal. Lord Harrison had attempted to invoke an ancient pack law, arguing that a ward of the estate could not be removed without the presiding Alpha's consent. Alistair's response had been to draw his broadsword, planting the 4-foot blade directly into the stone floor between Harrison's feet, fracturing the flagstones. "You are no Alpha," Alistair had growled, his aura flattening every guard in the room. "You are a parasite. I claim this female by the ancient right of the mate bond. If you wish to challenge my claim, pick up the sword." Harrison had collapsed to his knees, whimpering. Within the hour, Rowena was wrapped in the king's own heavy, fur-lined cloak and placed upon his warhorse, riding north toward the sovereign stronghold of Blackwood Keep. For the first few weeks at Blackwood, Rowena felt she was living in a fever dream. She was given a suite of chambers, adorned with velvet and roaring hearths, a stark contrast to the freezing cellars she had known for 20 years. Maids attended to her scars with soothing balms, and the finest silks were laid out for her. Yet the phantom pains in her throat and the suffocating pressure in her chest only grew worse. She felt exhausted, constantly shivering despite the fires, her suppressed wolf clawing frantically at the inside of her ribs. It was Alistair who realized something was deeply wrong. The mate bond allowed him to feel the frayed, chaotic edges of her physical distress. Refusing to rely on traditional pack healers, Alistair summoned Master Thomas Lineker, a renowned royal physician educated in the highly advanced medical courts of Padua. Lineker was a human, completely detached from the politics of werewolf hierarchy, and a master of toxicology. In the sunlit infirmary of Blackwood Keep, Master Lineker drew a vial of Rowena's blood, his brow furrowed as he held it up to the light. It was dark, almost sludgy. "Your Majesty," Lineker said, adjusting his spectacles. He pulled a heavy leather-bound tome from his satchel, turning to a page detailing botanical toxins. "The Queen's vocal cords are not paralyzed by trauma, nor is her wolf simply broken from fear. She is suffering from chronic, low-grade systemic poisoning." Alistair, standing guard by the door, went entirely rigid. "Explain." "Aconitum napellus," Lineker stated grimly, pointing to an illustration of a beautiful, deadly purple flower. "Monk's hood, or as your kind calls it, wolfsbane. In large doses it is fatal to lycanthropes, but administered in microscopic, highly diluted quantities over a span of decades, it acts as a chemical shackle. It suppresses the lupine gene, paralyzing the vocal cords and preventing the physical shift. Someone has been slipping this into her food or water since she was a child. They systematically bound her beast to keep it from challenging the local hierarchy." Rowena sat on the edge of the examination table, her heart dropping into her stomach. Lord Harrison, the daily rations of water she was given in the scullery, always drawn from a separate well, always tasting faintly of bitter ash. He hadn't just stolen her birthright, he had systematically caged her soul to ensure she could never claim it back. Her parents were the true Alphas of Cornwall. Harrison knew that if Rowena ever shifted, her sterling alpha aura would immediately outrank his. A monstrous, terrifying growl rattled the stone walls of the infirmary. Alistair's hands gripped the stone windowsill so hard the masonry cracked and crumbled beneath his fingers. His eyes blazed like dying suns. "He didn't just abuse her," Alistair snarled, the shadows in the room violently stretching and warping around him. "He orchestrated the rogue attack. He murdered her parents to take the territory, and kept her alive only because the pack laws required a blood heir to remain on the land." Rowena reached out, her trembling fingers wrapping around Alistair's massive forearm. Her touch was the only thing that stopped him from shifting right there and marching south to slaughter every living soul in Ironwood. He turned to her, his ferocious expression melting into a look of agonizing devotion. "Can it be cured, Master Lineker?" Alistair demanded, sinking to his knees before Rowena, pressing a kiss to her scarred knuckles. "Yes," Lineker replied carefully, "but the purging process will be agonizing. We must flush the toxin with an antidote of white willow and pure silverleaf extract. As the wolfsbane leaves her system, her wolf, caged for 20 years, will wake up all at once. It will be a violent rebirth." Rowena looked down at the king. She nodded firmly. She was tired of the silence. She was tired of the cage. The purging lasted 3 grueling days and nights. Rowena lay thrashing in the royal bedchamber, her veins burning as if liquid fire had been injected into her bloodstream. Through every agonizing hour, Alistair never left her side. He held her when she convulsed, his own deep, soothing alpha aura acting as a shield against the pain. He whispered ancient northern lullabies into her ear, bathing her sweat-soaked brow, taking as much of her pain through the mate bond as his body could withstand. On the night of the 3rd day, the fever finally broke. The bitter, ashen scent of the poison faded from the room, replaced by the crisp, overwhelming fragrance of winter lilies and lightning, Rowena's true scent. But Harrison had not been idle. Word had reached the disgraced lord through his spies that the king had discovered the poisoning. Knowing that an awake, fully realized Rowena Stirling would mean his execution by the sovereign's hand, Harrison made a desperate, suicidal play. He spent the last of the Ironwood treasury to hire a mercenary band of rogue Lycans, the very same bloodline of rogues he had used to slaughter Rowena's parents 20 years prior. Under the cover of a torrential midnight thunderstorm, Harrison and 50 heavily armed rogues breached the lower gates of Blackwood Keep. They had bribed a corrupt guard to sabotage the portcullis, flooding into the courtyard with weapons lacquered in liquid silver. The clash of steel and the roars of shifting wolves echoed up to the royal chambers. Alistair, exhausted from 3 days of tending to Rowena, stood up as his generals burst into the room. "My king! The courtyard is breached! It's Harrison of Ironwood! They have silver-tipped bolts!" Alistair looked back at Rowena. She was pale, her breathing shallow, but the dark veins on her neck had vanished. "Guard the door," Alistair commanded his generals, his voice a lethal, icy calm. "None shall pass." Alistair didn't bother with armor. He leapt directly from the balcony into the chaotic courtyard below, shifting mid-air. He landed not as a man, but as a colossal, pitch-black, dire wolf, easily twice the size of a standard alpha. The battle that ensued was a slaughter. Alistair tore through the rogue mercenaries with terrifying brutality, a shadow of death moving through the driving rain. But there were too many, and they were armed with silver. A volley of crossbow bolts caught the king in the shoulder and flank. The toxic metal hissed against his blood, forcing him back into his human form. He fell to one knee, panting, surrounded by the corpses of 20 rogues, as Harrison stepped forward from the shadows. Harrison sneered, holding a silver-forged broadsword. "You should have left the mute in the dirt, your majesty. You bring ruin upon yourself for a broken thing." Up in the royal chamber, Rowena's eyes snapped open, The mate bond screamed in her chest, a visceral, tearing agony. Alistair was bleeding. Alistair was dying. 20 years of suppressed grief, of swallowed screams, of terror and subjugation coalesced into a single, white-hot point of absolute fury. The psychological dam in her mind shattered. The physical shackles of the wolfsbane were gone. Rowena didn't walk to the balcony. She vaulted over the heavy oak bed. As her bare feet hit the stone floor, her bones began to crack and reshape. It wasn't the clumsy, painful shift of a novice. It was the explosive release of a caged goddess. Down in the courtyard, Harrison raised his sword to strike the kneeling king. Suddenly, a sound ripped through the thunder, a sound so pure, so immensely powerful. It shattered the stained glass windows of the keep. It was a roar that commanded the very earth to bow. From the high balcony, a blur of blinding, pure white fur launched into the storm. Rowena landed in the center of the courtyard, cracking the stone beneath her paws. She was magnificent. A true sterling alpha, her coat glowing like moonlight, her eyes blazing with the same fierce, unyielding silver as a winter star. Her aura exploded outward, a crushing wave of absolute dominance that instantly forced the remaining rogues onto their bellies, whimpering in submission to a bloodline vastly superior to their own. Harrison froze, his face draining of all color. He dropped the sword, his knees buckling under the sheer weight of her power. No! Impossible! Rowena stalked forward, her massive jaws parted, her silver eyes locked onto the man who had stolen her life. She didn't bite him. She didn't need to. She shifted back into a human form right in front of him, the rain washing over her flawless, unscarred skin. Alistair, clutching his bleeding shoulder, looked up at her with absolute awe. Rowena stood tall, a queen in her own right. She looked down at Harrison, her chest heaving. She took a deep breath, feeling the air move freely through her vocal cords for the first time in 2 decades. When she spoke, her voice was not a whisper. It was a commanding, velvet-wrapped blade that echoed through the entire courtyard. "You will hang from the gates of Cornwall by dawn," Rowena declared, her words flawless, ringing with regal authority. "And the crows will feast upon the rot you call a soul." Harrison wept, burying his face in the mud. Rowena turned her back on the pathetic creature and fell to her knees in the rain before Alistair. The terrifying Alpha King, bleeding and battered, smiled. A real, breathtaking smile. He reached out, his bloody hand cradling the back of her neck, pulling her forehead against his, just as he had done in the grand hall. "I hear you, my queen," Alistair whispered into the rain. "Loud and clear." Did Rowena's silent strength and explosive return to power leave you breathless? Every queen has a voice. Some just need the right king to listen. If you loved this tale of betrayal, fated mates, and ultimate revenge, hit that like button, share this video with your pack, and subscribe for more epic fantasy romances. What should our next story be? Let us know in the comments below.